Of all the characters in my Legacy series that I have worked on thus far, Noah, who serves as the partner to my main protagonist Tulip, has always been by far the most difficult character I've worked with design-wise. Mostly due to the fact he never had an official design in mind throughout his entire existence. Because Noah, just like Tulip, was technically a self-insert character. Noah originally was my middle school best friend back in the days where magic was in the imagination and not in YouTube videos and draw with me's and all of the other fun stuff. So back in those days, I had my notebook, pencil, and colored pencils, and I would draw us characters back when I was still a novice artist. Oh, hello. Idiot interruptions. But as all of childhood friendships go, eventually I had to move away, and Noah and I grew obviously distant. Since back in the early days of internet for me, I had very little ways to interact with anyone else online, since most of my online interactions wouldn't happen until closer to my high school years. So that meant there was an emotional connection to a childhood best friend and my second ever OC, Noah. And as a result, it would be the most complex and emotional dealings that I've ever had to do with a character. And his rewrite becomes especially important because of the problematic elements I would have to work with once I get through my years of trying to write it while I was in high school. So the original version, like I said, had been written in high school. So Noah's story was something that I have eventually become ashamed of, mostly because of the lacking moral perspective of what I was actually portraying within my writing. Because I had conceptually changed Noah's race from a human with elemental powers to a type of dog I was obsessed with that happened to live in some obscure regions in Africa, I would have basically created a savior complex with how Tulip interacts with Noah himself in the story. Since in this part of the story, there's kind of this aimless wandering of Tulip across the world, ending up in Africa, meeting Noah during his lowest point, saving him from a conveniently placed illness, and then just injecting herself into all of his social affairs then after, and then whisking them all away back to the States where she canonically should have been from. But obviously this is extremely problematic and not very well thought out. So in his rewrite that I had been working on for the last little while, I decided it would be better if he was a different breed of dog, if I wanted to keep him that route. So the argument would be, if he is still a dog, where would he be from? To decide what type of dog he would end up being. And I think to help save a little face in his character, I decided he would be from the region somewhere around present-day Alaska. So that kind of gave me some options. Not a lot of options, but it was between some type of wolf breed, a husky breed, or some coyote breeds that would exist in the region. I decided it would be a lot more fun to work with a coyote since it's not as portrayed in media how like coyote and their type of pack structures work. And then also it allows me to break away from the stereotypical representation of wolf packs that you see in media that don't actually exist in nature, since all wolf packs are just tiny families, not complex, strength, grinding, alpha man energy, which the researcher themselves had debunked, I have once heard. So, rather than doing that, we go with the coyote type of family structure, which tend to be a lot smaller, more tight-knit, and more recluse, which ends up working way better with how Tulip and Noah's dynamic ends up working out in the longevity of the story. Since Noah and Tulip tend to be more isolated compared to the rest of the characters in Secrets of Earth, it ends up working out that they would be a smaller family which also would be a contradiction to my original writings, which I think would be a fair loss, because originally I had written that they had this massive family with 100+ other dogs in their tight-knit family that would come from like Noah's side, giving Co and Joy, which are their children, more familial support outside of that. But because this is not utilized, and I have actually no context to how a large family functions, since I am a pretty much singly raised child of a single mother, support systems are a lot smaller for me. So I think it would be better to represent a smaller support system for them, since that's something I am more capable of understanding, I would think. And then it would also really push tight the disparity of the conflict between how Tulip and her daughter interacts, and then how much more important it is that Noah acts as a peacekeeper in this family, given that he is the more supportive role model of the Earth household. But in terms of actually designing Noah, I had to reverse engineer his son's design, because his son has a more solidified design. Because I've been working with him a lot more in the present day, it was a lot easier to come up with how would his father look if I already knew how his son looked, since I pretty much used the same basic formula of, oh, Tulip's daughter looks just like her, so Noah's son must look just like him. So we went with that. So I kind of kept a bit of the tan skin, because even though they'd be from a colder climate, having more tan but a little bit more pale skin would probably be easily common, especially because then it would draw onto the different type of coat patterns that would exist. For his design, outfit-wise, I think it would be a fun contrast if he had the pinkish hues that I ended up giving him as a nice complement to the nice pastel greens Tulip has in her spring form, and then they would be a nice complement to her nice neutral autumn colors that she gets in the latter half of her story moving forward. And then his colors would kind of darken to complement. And I think going with like some nice neutrals for his pants as well was a nice touch. His amulet, on the other hand, pretty much stays unchanged from his original concept to present day, since the symbol of what the amulet stands for is kind of the only thing that matters more than what it actually is design-wise. It's just a simple gold chain with a nice bright emerald gemstone that is supposed to be half of Tulip's soul, since that is basically how she proposed to him. She proposed by giving him a literal fraction of her soul, and he wears it, which gives him his human form. And he actually gets a smaller scale version of her powers for it. So it kind of acts as a win-win. He gets to stay with her, he gets to have a human form, and he gets to be able to protect himself should there be any problems that arise. Personality-wise, Noah hasn't changed very much from concept either. He is still a very friendly fella, because he is dog, he is good boy, but he is also a very caring father. As a father of 2 delightful children, he learns a lot more about himself through how he interacts with them, and with how he basically had to grow up alongside Tulip in the end, through the many, many years that they would subsequently be together. He learns that he enjoys cooking and being a family man. He is the stay-at-home dad to Tulip's probably 9 to 5, if Tulip did work a 9 to 5. And they would end up settling down, probably in some remote part of the United States, since that would be probably far enough away from humans for Tulip to have, like, some comfort, but at least close enough, I would imagine, to where if Noah wanted to go pretend to socialize, he could. Although I doubt he would, because he has no reason to really socialize with humans. And then this place that they settle in would also become the come back to point throughout the story for other eventual main characters, since through each part of my Legacy series, the story focuses on somebody else, be it one of their children or another half children or some other person who is eventually to be a part of their family. That means that Noah also acts as a peacekeeper, so to speak, to help keep his home nice and open to those around him, especially when it comes to the conflict between his daughter and his wife. Because the two don't tend to get along and the tensions run high very quickly in their story, he tries to act as the middleman, help explain his wife's behavior, and try to get Tulip to at least understand his daughter's desire for her own sense of freedom. And then he also just gets to be a great dad to his son. They like playing kickball together, and it's very cute. And he helps them with their training despite not being a very strong elemental user himself compared to his kids, which is, I think, very fun. And then he gets to act as a nice welcome home hug to anybody who comes to visit them, making them like little bits of food and stews and talking about whatever problems ail them to make them come visit their little humble abode in the mountains. So Noah as a character has been the most conflicting one I've ever worked with because of his emotional attachment to one of my older best friends that I will probably never get to see again, as well as being a just difficult character to work with because of the lacking experience I have in reflecting on how my own words could be interpreted. So that means I ended up creating themes that are problematic. But that just means now that I am older than when I was a freshman in high school, I have the hindsight and current reflective capabilities to see it and rectify it when I ever do my new writings and maybe make a new comic version. Because now in the original story, instead of just being a sickly dog who is whisked away from his country after basically being taken over by a magical entity, he now is essentially, he still gets cured, but he develops a slower burn relationship with her as she starts to work through the trauma of what has happened to her, and he works through his emotional turmoil of how he doesn't feel connected to anyone in his life, which I think is a better written story if I ever get around to writing it down. So, even as a side character in my own story, I still think Noah is an important character to have worked with altogether. He is an important milestone to get this to end the story for Tulip and to begin the story for the next characters to follow. And even then, he just acts as a nice pace-breaking part of just whenever I need a break from writing overly intense, overly dramatic, overly traumatic types of stories. He's a nice, friendly guy. He is, in fact, a very good boy. And it's important to have some fun characters to reflect on in your stories. So thank you so much for watching, and feel free to stick around and subscribe to stay up to date with any new character designs I have going on. And I will see you again in the next character design breakdown, and see you again in the crossroads. Bye-bye.